It was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, but instead, the church fell silent as the groom slowly stepped away from the altar. Every guest watched in disbelief as the young bride sat helplessly in her wheelchair, her white dress glowing beneath the stained glass windows while tears silently rolled down her cheeks. The whispers grew louder with every passing second. Some pitied her, others looked away, and a few cruel voices claimed she would never have a real family because she was paralyzed. Yet no one could have imagined that before the sun set that evening, a widowed single father would make a decision so extraordinary that it would leave an entire town speechless and forever change two broken lives. Before we begin this unforgettable story, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment telling us if you believe kindness can change someone's destiny, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories that restore faith in humanity. Grace Bennett had once been known as one of the brightest young women in Cedar Ridge, Colorado. She dreamed of becoming an elementary school teacher, loved volunteering at her local church, and believed life would always reward kindness with happiness. Everything changed 3 years earlier when a distracted truck driver ran a red light and crashed into her small car during a rainy afternoon. The accident claimed her ability to walk forever. Months of surgeries and painful rehabilitation followed, but despite countless therapies, Grace remained confined to a wheelchair. Although she fought every day to smile, she quietly watched friends drift away and watched her fiancé slowly become someone she barely recognized. At first he promised he would stay beside her no matter what happened, but as the wedding approached, his affection faded into obligation, and obligation eventually became embarrassment. Still, Grace refused to give up on love. She spent months preparing for the wedding, sewing decorations by hand, writing heartfelt letters to every guest, and believing that true commitment meant standing beside someone through life's darkest storms. On the wedding morning, she looked into the mirror and chose hope over fear. Her mother adjusted her veil with trembling hands, praying that everything would finally go right. Unfortunately, fate had one more heartbreak waiting. As the ceremony began inside the beautiful white church overlooking the Rocky Mountains, everyone admired Grace's courage. She smiled despite the fear hiding behind her eyes. But moments before exchanging vows, the groom admitted he could not spend his future caring for someone who would never walk again. His cruel words echoed through the sanctuary before he walked away, leaving Grace alone before hundreds of horrified guests. Cameras captured every heartbreaking second, and many people quietly slipped out, unable to witness any more pain. Grace remained sitting in silence, her bouquet resting on her lap while her dreams collapsed around her. News of the abandoned bride spread quickly throughout the small American town. Local residents debated the heartbreaking event, while social media filled with sympathy and anger. Grace locked herself inside her modest home for weeks, convinced that everyone now saw her as the woman who had been rejected because she was broken. Depression surrounded her like heavy fog. She stopped answering phone calls, stopped attending church, and even questioned whether God had forgotten her. Only one person unexpectedly refused to let her disappear. His name was Michael Carter, a 38-year-old widowed father raising his 8-year-old daughter, Abigail, by himself. Michael worked long hours as a city bus mechanic in Denver. His wife had passed away from cancer 4 years earlier, leaving him with endless responsibilities and an aching heart. Life had taught him that love was never measured by perfection but by sacrifice, loyalty, and compassion. One evening while watching the local news, he saw Grace sitting alone in her wedding dress after being abandoned. The sadness in her eyes reminded him of the emptiness he had seen in the mirror after losing his own wife. Michael could have simply felt sorry for her like everyone else. Instead, he drove nearly 2 hours to Cedar Ridge carrying nothing more than homemade soup prepared by Abigail and a simple handwritten note that read, "No one deserves to eat alone after surviving the hardest day of their life." Grace almost refused to open the door, but Abigail's cheerful smile gently melted the walls around her heart. The little girl immediately treated Grace like an old friend instead of someone defined by a wheelchair. They shared dinner, laughed over old family photographs, and for the first time in weeks, Grace smiled without forcing herself. Michael never offered pity. He offered friendship, respect, and genuine kindness. Weeks slowly turned into months. Michael and Abigail visited almost every weekend. Sometimes they planted flowers together. Other times they watched movies or volunteered at local charity events where Grace organized donations for families with disabilities. Michael admired how Grace always found ways to encourage others despite carrying enormous pain herself. Grace admired how patiently Michael balanced work, fatherhood, and endless responsibilities without complaining. Abigail quietly wished every day that Grace would become part of their family. Their growing friendship attracted gossip. Some neighbors believed Michael only felt sorry for Grace. Others insisted a hard-working single father deserved someone healthier. Michael ignored every opinion because he had already learned that people who judge from a distance rarely understand another person's heart. One autumn afternoon, Grace organized a fundraiser supporting wheelchair-accessible playgrounds across Colorado. During the event, she watched dozens of children with disabilities laugh freely beside families who finally felt included. Michael stood nearby holding Abigail's hand while realizing something powerful. Grace had spent years believing she had nothing left to offer the world, yet she was changing countless lives simply by refusing to surrender. As the fundraiser ended beneath clear blue skies, Michael wheeled Grace toward the stage where volunteers gathered for photographs. Without warning, he stepped forward before hundreds of people. Instead of delivering a speech about charity, he knelt beside her wheelchair, looked into her tear-filled eyes, and gently placed a small velvet box in her hands. He wasn't proposing out of sympathy. He was asking because he had fallen deeply in love with the woman whose strength had inspired him every single day. Abigail wrapped her tiny arms around Grace and smiled brighter than anyone there. The crowd stood frozen before erupting into applause that echoed through the park. Their wedding several months later looked nothing like the first one. There were no expensive decorations or luxurious receptions. Friends from church filled the small community chapel with homemade flowers, laughter, and genuine joy. Michael proudly stood beside Grace, not because he wanted to rescue her, but because he believed she had already rescued his lonely heart. Abigail carried the rings with overwhelming excitement, finally gaining the loving mother she had prayed for every night. Marriage was not magically perfect. Grace still faced physical challenges, painful therapy sessions, and difficult days when frustration returned. Michael still worked exhausting hours. Money remained tight, and life continued presenting obstacles. But unlike before, Grace never faced those battles alone. Together they adapted their home, celebrated every small victory, and reminded each other that love grows strongest when tested by hardship instead of comfort. Years later, their story inspired countless families throughout the United States. Grace became a motivational speaker advocating for disability inclusion in schools and communities, while Michael continued working proudly as a mechanic, never seeking fame. Abigail grew into a compassionate young woman who often told classmates that the strongest person she had ever known was her mother. The same people who once whispered that Grace would never have a family now watched her surrounded by unconditional love, proving that true beauty is measured by courage, not physical ability. If this story has touched your heart so far, please share your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. Your words may encourage someone who feels hopeless today. Sometimes life doesn't give us the ending we expected. Sometimes it tears apart every dream we carefully planned. Yet every broken chapter can become the beginning of something even more meaningful when compassion replaces judgment and courage overcomes fear. Grace lost the wedding she thought she wanted, but she found the family she truly needed. Michael believed he was simply comforting a stranger, yet he discovered the love that healed his own wounded heart. Their journey reminds us that the greatest miracles often arrive disguised as our greatest disappointments. Before this story ends, please leave a comment with the words "Kindness always wins" if you believe that every person deserves love, respect, and a second chance. If this story moved you, please like this video, share it with your family and friends, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so more people can discover inspiring stories that remind the world that hope is never lost, love is never defined by appearances, and one act of compassion can change a life forever.